Okay, well, welcome everybody to our December 15th, 2021 Community and Development Series. I'd like to just let everybody know who's attending that the webinar is being recorded, and once it's done, will be available on our Carlton Fields website. Also want to let everyone who's on the call know that you will be muted during the call or during the webinar. But if you do have questions, you should be able to scroll down to the bottom of the screen, and there's a button called Q&A. And if you click on that Q&A button, you'll be able to post any questions, and we would encourage you to ask whatever questions you might have. Let us know. We have questions certainly set up that we're going to be talking about. But if you have questions, we would certainly like to address those today as well. So just a reminder of that. A little bit about our series, the Community and Development Series, Carlton Fields Development Industry Group. We have attorneys that assist clients in all aspects of development deals, and we've developed these forums in an effort to cultivate the sharing of ideas and to provide an opportunity for networking by those within the development industry group. So today's program, moving forward, is entitled "Looking Forward to the Future of the Tampa Bay Region," and we are very fortunate and happy to have with us today the President and CEO of the Tampa Bay Partnership, Bemetra Simmons. The Tampa Bay Partnership is a coalition of regional business leaders working together to improve the personal and economic well-being of Tampa Bay residents. Bemetra, before becoming the CEO of the Tampa Bay Partnership, previously served as the Chief Strategy and Operations Officer for United Way Suncoast, where she led core operations functions, including finance and information technology and community investment for a 5-county region. Before that, Bemetra was a banking executive working as the Florida Managing Director at Mutual of Omaha Bank and holding leadership roles at Wells Fargo and BB&T. She also serves on the Board of Commissioners for the Tampa Housing Authority, the Executive Committee for the Tampa Bay Chamber of Commerce, and the Community Tampa Bay Board. With that, Bemetra, welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me. Looking forward to this.
Yeah. As I mentioned, you had a background in banking before what I would call sort of shifting gears and moving into United Way, and now eventually with the Tampa Bay Partnership. So my first question would be to ask you, what attracted you to go that route?
Yeah, great question. So even when I was working in financial services and very much enjoyed that work, especially working with, small business owners and working with a lot of folks who are second and third generation business owners. I mean, that was great. The idea was to do a couple things when I made, the shift, if you will, to go over to United Way. One gave me an opportunity to marry my personal value system of what I was doing professionally on an everyday basis and going to work with United Way. And then secondly, it allowed me to expand my skill set as a leader. I wasn't necessarily going to get, IT experience or board management experience or operations experience working as a market president for a bank. And this, I felt, gave me an opportunity to do things, something a little selfish, like I said, like, marry my personal value system, and then also, being able to grow and expand my skill set as a leader. So it ended up just being a nice combination of the two and bringing everything that I already been doing from a volunteer standpoint in the community together.
Excellent. And it seems like maybe it wasn't so much of a shift as I thought. It just seems like a natural progression.
Yeah, a little bit, right?
Yeah. So for those on the call or on the webinar who don't know that much about the Tampa Bay Partnership, can you give sort of a high level background, maybe some background history of Tampa Bay Partnership and how it's structured, et cetera?
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to. So the partnership was actually formed in 1994, and it started as a regional economic development organization. And so for 20 years, we worked with partners throughout the 8-county region to market Tampa Bay as the place to be for business. But times change, and like many smart businesses, the leaders of the partnership at that time understood that and saw the need to evolve to help the organization stay relevant and impactful in our community. So between 2014 and 2016, the partnership made a major pivot, and you'll hear that word from folks who were involved in the partnership at that time, and adopted a new mission, which is what we do today, focused on research, public policy, and advocacy. And in doing that, we essentially benchmarked similar organizations across the country. And we found that the most successful ones had a few key things in common, which we made as the bedmark of our pivot. First, they were led by a relatively small group of business leaders that maintained strong relationships with the local elected officials and the not-for-profit partners. Secondly, they were privately funded. And third, they used objective data to measure the performance of the region against other communities nationwide. And so our leaders took those lessons to heart. And today we're a coalition of the region's top employers working together to improve the lives of the Tampa Bay residents. So we're essentially the intersectionality between business, government, and community.
Gotcha. And we're going to talk a little bit more about some of those things here in a little bit more detail, but thank you. I think that's helpful for those who didn't know that much about the partnership. Can you talk a little bit more about the structure and the role of the regional business leaders and the collaboration with the government and nonprofit partners that you guys do?
Yeah, so we have, our investors are basically broken out into two groups, our Council of Governors and our Leadership Council. And what we have is, everything from, the leadership from the sports teams to financial organizations such as Truist and PNC and Fifth Third. We've got, large hospital systems that are involved in the partnership, law firms, not-for-profit community like United Way, Suncoast, and Community Foundation. What we essentially do is try to take a look at what are the most pressing issues that are affecting our region. And so for the partnership to get involved, it has to have a regional focus, and the partnership we feel should have a unique role to play in helping with that. So the current issues that we're focusing on today, no surprise, is transportation options, transportation and mobility options that connect our counties, workforce and talent management, racial equity, the economic impact of sea level rise, the economic impact of the opioid crisis, and certainly, COVID and the impact of COVID to our community, both from a business and health and wellness perspective. So those are kind of the pressing topics that we're working on right now as an organization. And again, not only do we have these industries well represented, but the partnership has, to be an investor of the partnership, you're either the CEO of that organization or the regional lead or the head. So the idea is that you've got the decision makers from each of those organizations around the table, which makes us a little bit different than a chamber or an EDC.
Yeah, I suspect that becomes very important because otherwise you probably are spinning wheels and not really getting a whole lot done.
100%.
Yeah. You did mention COVID, and we're going to talk about, you mentioned transportation, talent growth, economic development, racial equality. COVID, you actually took over as the president and CEO right in the middle, full blown of a pandemic. And so one of the questions I have certainly is how, if at all, that has affected your ability to either define some of the goals that you were just talking about and some of the things that the partnership wants to focus on, and then, your ability to actually accomplish those goals, in the middle of a pandemic.
Well, I think COVID for all of us has forced us to look at our businesses with a little bit different lens and how we show up to work, how we work. And, our what we're doing at the partnership is certainly no different from that. The future of work obviously is going to be a really big deal. I can say that, of the investors that we have, everyone is looking at some type of hybrid model as it relates to work moving forward. We don't have any organization that's saying we're going back to a 5-day, work week, unless they, have positions obviously that are client or customer community facing. COVID in terms of our work, this is going to be our first year when we have the state of the region next month in January that will show the data of how COVID has impacted our communities. And I can give you a little bit of common attractions, if you will. Some of that is, what has been the impact on, housing prices, what's been the impact on wages, what's been the impact on employment, unemployment, things of that nature. So this will be our first set of posts. It's not even posts, but data since we've been in COVID and how that's affecting affecting our community. In terms of how we do our work, just more virtually, like everybody else. I feel like every time we get to a point where we can get comfortable being out in front of people, another variant comes out, and then we all are like, oh my goodness, do we have to go back inside? But, a lot of this work is, getting in front of folks and relationship built. And it's just the way that you do those relationships is slightly different.
Right. But it sounds like you've been able to shift and adjust, and still be able to accomplish those goals, just maybe like we're doing today over electronic means or some other means.
Right. And then for the work itself, like, what is COVID's impact going to mean to the talent pipeline? And how do we approach what we're doing for workforce development? What does that mean from a transportation standpoint? So, for example, here in Hillsborough County, it takes about an hour for someone to be able to use our bus system. That's an awfully long time if somebody's trying to use that as a commuting source of transportation. And how do we get that lowered to even say 30 minutes or to 15 minutes? And, in terms of COVID, that's gotten longer. That time period has gotten longer because there's fewer buses that are running because ridership dropped so significantly. So that's kind of how COVID has impacted our work, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I would imagine too that not just the timing based on the COVID, but based on the ability of people to find employment for to find drivers, to find
that's right
people that are operating those businesses as well.
Right, getting folks back to work, and then the ability for them to be able to get to those jobs. COVID has had an impact on all those things, and that's some of the research that we've been doing that we'll be discussing come January.
Gotcha. Do you have any insight, any recent trends that have been identified that you're expecting to see, or that have been already identified?
The unemployment in our region, we're so highly tied to tourism. So we've seen that we've outpaced, again, the core of all of our work is the regional competitiveness report. So for those of you who are not familiar with that, when I talk about the state of the region, that's where we go over this data. And that regional competitiveness report compares the Tampa Bay area in 60 different in 60 different areas against 19 peer and aspirational markets. And so when I talk about the impact of COVID, it will show us how Tampa Bay has been performing, and then it breaks it out by demographic and county against those other peer and aspirational markets. One of the things that we've seen is, like I said, our unemployment has been higher than our peer markets because we're so closely tied to tourism. And then also our 18 to 25 demographic of working, that number is not as robust as we would like for it to be seen. Our housing prices have risen significantly, but wages have not caught up with that relative to our market. So those are some of the things that we've seen through the data as we're starting to synthesize that and analyze it right now.
Have you seen in that report, has it given any kind of indication about the tourism itself, as far as a hit that we might have taken as a result of COVID, or just in general?
No, just tourism and people's comfort level in terms of travel and being in spaces with large groups of people. What the data is kind of interesting is that people have less of a tolerance to be around large groups of people for work and a higher tolerance for social. Surprise, surprise. So they don't want to go back to the office 5 days a week, but they will go to a Bucks game.
Right. And I wonder if it matters. I mean, when you compare us, you said 19 different markets, and I'm going to ask you in a minute about a little bit more about that. But as far as our market, seems to me, Florida being one of the few states across the country that really has been more open, if you will, than some of the other states during the pandemic. I wonder, what kind of an effect that might have had, on people being able to come here or wanting to come here.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing that, particularly, since some of the markets, that we compare ourselves against are like Austin. Texas has been, as open pretty much as Florida. But, what do we look like, say against a Nashville or against a Raleigh, North Carolina, that had a lot more COVID restrictions? Those are some of the things that we should be able to see when we have the State of the Region event here on the 21st of January, is to see how the COVID restrictions or lack of restrictions affect the data itself and how that bared out.
Right. The lack of restrictions, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah. And speaking of the different markets, I'd be interested to know, are the markets generally, do they try to, these 19 other markets try to be similar in size and in structure? Or are some of the markets, I'm thinking of like Los Angeles, New York, Washington, D.C. might, obviously be much larger markets than Tampa.
Right.
Are those some of the groups, or do we try to keep it somewhat close?
It's both, Scott. So that's why I said it's a combination of pure markets, which we would consider Charlotte, North Carolina to be a pure market, Austin, Texas to be a pure market. And then some of them are aspirational, markets, right, like a Chicago, like you said, or in LA. So it's a combination of pure and aspirational markets.
Gotcha. Well, and that just sort of reminds me, I moved down in 2005 from the Washington, D.C. area, but I started coming down to Tampa area probably back in like 1993. And I remember thinking back then, and even in 2004, 2005, that the Tampa Bay market, the transportation wise, reminded me a lot of growing up in the DC area. Now, by the time, I moved down here, the DC area was, so much more expansive than it was when I was growing up. That's about, 25, 30 years had gone by with that shift. What I haven't seen in the Tampa area is, there's been some transportation expansion, of our highways and public transportation, but at least personally, doesn't appear to me to be keeping pace with some of the other market, especially the one that I'm more familiar with, the Washington D.C. market. And so, I guess, one of my questions, is about the transportation, and love to hear your thoughts on why this is such an important issue to our region.
Right. So I think transportation is important to our region for a number of reasons. One, as we are attracting new businesses to our region, they're certainly going to take a look at what is our transportation options, what does transportation look like in our community. And if our only mode of transportation is people getting in their cars and driving, that may not be as attractive to larger businesses that are looking to relocate large groups of employees here or expand large groups of employees in our market. Secondly, how long it takes you to get to work matters in terms of quality of life, and also how you feel when you get to work and how productive you're ready to be when you get there. And then third of all, I always say this, in the South, we think that going somewhere means picking up your keys and getting in your car. In other parts of the country, it's normal to have various mobility options. It's not uncommon for everyone to take public transportation. You mentioned DC, I've never driven in DC because between the metro and you don't need to drive, it's just not necessarily. And then who wants to drive in DC if you don't have to, right?
Right.
Then when I lived in Atlanta, which doesn't have the best transportation options, but at least you didn't have to drive to go to the airport. You didn't have to drive to go to a sporting event or to a concert, things of that nature. So it matters to us because of not only the quality of life, and it matters to us as business people for how long our employees have to get to work. So we don't want to put people in a situation where they have to live so far out and their commute is so long that they're turning down opportunities to do something new within an organization because of the transportation challenges and headaches and congestion of doing that. So, from a partnerships perspective, this has probably been the biggest issue that we've been engaged on over the last 5 years. So in 2016, we started championing the 41-mile regional rapid transit project that will ultimately connect Pasco, Hillsborough, Pinellas counties along the I-275 corridor. We were a significant contributor and use our political influence on the offer transportation effort and ultimately its legal defense. And the one most recently that we're most proud of is we were one of the advocates in the region that helped us successfully get the reinstatement of the funding and the accelerated timeline for the West Shore interchange, which is going to be a game changer for our community. But transportation matters to each and every one of us because, like I said, how long it takes you to get to work and how you can get to work can also affect what kind of jobs you can get to. If you live in a part of town where your only mode of transportation is walking and riding your bike, then you only have access to the jobs that you can do that in. Whereas if we have a robust bus system or a robust train system or rail system, it opens up the whole region to you in terms of what types of jobs that you have access to.
Absolutely. Now, one thing that I didn't hear you mention, we were talking about more of the regional, local, the regional rapid transit program and the local funding efforts. But one thing that I definitely want to ask you about is the partnership's focus and input on high-speed rail.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've seen in the news that Brightline is moving into Orlando, and then eventually, I think the plan would be to move into Tampa. And I'm not sure if you guys have had any input or efforts in that regard yet, and if so, what they were, and then what you're thinking, the future holds for that.
Sure. Well, the partnership is a big supporter of Brightline. We absolutely want to see, obviously, the second piece of it technically get done between Orlando and Miami, and then ultimately come over from Orlando over to Tampa. So we're a supporter of Brightline. Brightline is one of the partnership's investors, and we think it's an important project that will connect three major metro areas in our community by train, which would be Miami, Orlando, and Tampa Bay. So that's one of the projects that we're actively working on right now. Brightline is about 64% complete, the Orlando to Miami piece, and then they're hoping to break ground next year on their maintenance facility in Orlando, and then hopefully we'll see within the next 3 years of it come over to Tampa. But yes, the partnership is involved and a big supporter of Brightline. And
That's
anybody
great.
I think who has to drive between Tampa and Orlando is a big supporter of seeing Brightline come in.
I imagine so. I imagine it would be a huge convenience to be able to sit on a train and maybe even do work or do other things as opposed to paying attention to what's going on around on the roads.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to be able to work, have Wi-Fi, and just not the stress of driving for that, hour and some change, or sometimes an hour and a half, depending on what's happening on I-4.
Right. And so you did mention the local transportation. And I think, if I recall correctly, years ago when the discussion was about the high-speed rail, and I recall a questionnaire where they interviewed people, and they said, okay, well, if you had high-speed rail between Orlando and Tampa, would you support that? And I think it was overwhelmingly supported. And then the next question was, would you personally use it? And I think back then, and this was maybe, I want to say over 10 or 15 years ago, maybe 10 or 12 years ago. And there was a drastic drop in those who said they would use it. And I think, part of the reason for that was once you got to your destination, if you were coming from Orlando to Tampa or Tampa to Orlando, once you got to your destination, you still had to get around. You still had to get from wherever the high-speed rail dropped you off to wherever you were going. So I think at the time, you either had, you had limited choices. You had cabs, maybe buses. Now, of course, there's Uber. I think this was pre-Uber, and so I'd love to hear your thoughts on on what you think we need to do and what the partnership's efforts might be in that regard to expanding our local, maybe light rail, the buses, cabs and Uber, those types of things. again, once, so that if people are using the high-speed rail to get between Orlando and Tampa, what they do once they're here.
Right. I think obviously you've made a great point, Scott. This is a different conversation with rideshare and things of that nature. But, there is no regional transit plan, if you will, without having local options to tie into. And so one of the things that we do is spend our time, spending time with the local elected officials in each of the 8 counties to hear what their local priorities are from a transportation perspective, so that we can help advocate for regional stuff that can tie into that. So whether it's bus rapid transit to go with the RRT, to go with, Brightline, to go with rideshare, whatever, go with streetcar, whatever the local counties and local cities want to accomplish. But the regional has to go hand in hand with the local. I think our biggest challenge, if you will, here in Tampa Bay as it relates to transit is sometimes I think we let perfect get in the way of good. And we are so starved. We need to be pressing every mobility lever that we can around the 8 county area, so that we can have local tie-in options to any regional solution that we're looking at advocating for.
I think that's very well put. Don't let perfect get in the way of good. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about that, and then I guess the last transportation question I would have is focused more on the highways and the roads, and I'd throw in as well, because it occurred to me as you were going through this, is that the Tampa Bay Partnership is focused obviously on our Tampa Bay region, but it seems to me that you necessarily must need to work with other governmental departments, and not just in this region, but in surrounding regions, to see what they're doing, to kind of coordinate what you're doing with what they're doing, so that it all, again, sort of ties together, and and that the plans are coordinated.
Sure. So I've been in this role now for a little over 2 months, and that's a big chunk of what I've been spending my time doing, is meeting with not only our local elected officials, so our mayors of the big areas, the county commissioners, but also our state representatives, and then Treasury, FDOT Secretary Tebow, hearing from Secretary Goodwin, hearing what everybody has, what their priorities are. There's no way we can do our job effectively as a partnership without our help of the elected officials, and so we have to have relationships with them and know what their priorities are and how they want to attack things in order to get things done. One of the things that was very clear that I heard in Tallahassee, particularly from Secretary Tebow, who's our FDOT secretary, was that when we speak with one voice as a region, we have a greater opportunity to get what we want done. And the West Shore Interchange is a great example of that. When you talk about that project, if you talk to 6 different groups, they'll all say, they were instrumental in getting that project accelerated and getting that funding reinstated and the timeline accelerated. And they're all right. So when we go to Tampa Bay, if it's the Tampa Bay Chamber, if it's the Tampa Bay Partnership, if it's the St. Pete Chamber, if it's the West Shore Alliance, and we're all saying this is a project that we want, we have a better shot at getting that than if 8 different groups come with 8 different priorities for our region. I think Brightline is going to be another example of that. Like, where ultimately Brightline comes in from Orlando to Tampa is going to be up to us as a region, where we say we want that state, where we want that first stop to be. And if we're speaking with one voice, we have a better shot at getting that. That's critically important, because we don't have a regional transportation, organization. So then we have to work together and develop relationships so that we can work as a unit.
And this may be a loaded question, but do you anticipate being able to have that alignment when it comes to the high-speed rail?
I hope we can, right? I think that everybody, the majority of people, let me say there's nothing's ever everybody or nobody. The majority of residents would like to see Brightline come in. Where it comes in terms of first stop, because all this is phase 1. It's not like they're going to do one stop and then we're done forever and ever, amen. I think the partnership can play a pivotal role in making sure everyone understands what's going on, where the project is right now, where they're looking at, and then all of us working together in conjunction for the good of getting rail over here from Orlando.
Okay. Well, I'm going to move on from transportation and move on to the talent management or talent growth. And my first question there is how you think the Tampa Bay area compares with other communities in that regard.
Yeah, so I think we've got our work cut out for us. That was one of the things that was born out of the regional competitiveness report that we did a couple of years ago, is how badly we were struggling from a workforce and talent management perspective. From that was born Tampa Bay Works, which is a not-for-profit that helps collect where the business is. So there's different collaboratives. The first one that they've worked on is the manufacturing collaborative. So basically the manufacturing companies put in, like, these are the jobs that we have open, whether it be machinists or welders or whatever it may be, and then connect them with the supply side, whether it be, the state colleges and associations that have the workers so that they can be matched together. What we're finding is that, that's going to help upskill workers in our community, but that was solely spun out of the regional competitiveness report. Is like, okay, we need this for our community. We've got to do that in every single sector and industry that we have, Scott. We've got to do that for healthcare. We've got to do that for financial services. We have to do this, and we have to have a structured approach of how to get people upskilled, and then once they get those skills, how to get them connected to the jobs that they need. And this organization will allow people to do that. The workers will be able to go on to the site, look within a 50-mile radius based on their skill set of what's open, and then the businesses will be able to put their jobs out there and then have that connection take place.
Yeah, and you said that report, I want to say you said that report came out back in, was it 2014?
That was in 2016.
16. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So a little bit of time has gone by. And so I guess my follow-up question to that would be, we were not doing a great job based on that report, apparently. Do you think we're doing a better job now? And are we heading in the right direction?
We're heading in the right direction, but we haven't had significant improvement. We've had incremental improvement. And then, with COVID, I'm not sure how that would have slowed us down or helped us maintain. When you get a report and it says, hey, you were 25th out of 28 markets, that's not something that you feel good about. Again, I don't think overnight you're going to go from 25th to 12th, but you hope to go from 25th to 22nd, 22nd
Right.
to 18th, so on and so forth. I know a lot of folks think, why would we put out a report that says that we're 25th out of 28? I would say this as someone who played college basketball. You have to know where you start. You have to keep score to know where you are and know where your weaknesses are. You don't watch game film to dwell on your mistakes. You watch it so that you don't make the same mistakes in the game moving forward. That's what this data does for us. It's also, if I'm Amazon or name, big company ABC, they know what our data looks like. So we better darn sure know it, so we know how to improve so that we can win and help our EDCs win these companies coming to our communities.
Right. Yeah. Putting our head in the sand doesn't really get anything accomplished.
No.
And so you mentioned local businesses and universities and aligning those things. In what way is the partnership working with universities and local businesses to try to address these shortcomings and these issues?
So Tampa Bay Works is, I say, the first step toward that. I think the second step is getting all of the state colleges involved. I feel like no one knows workforce better than our state college systems, whether it be Hillsborough Community College or St. Pete College or, Pasco, State College. We need to get them involved so that they, have a seat at the table. I think where the partnership can really play a unique role is not bringing all these folks in to be investors in the partnership, but getting them around the table with the business leaders to make sure that we are all speaking in the same sandbox. Because it does not do any good if the universities are educating for skills that the businesses don't need, and then the students graduate with skills that aren't going to help them actually land a job. So I think bringing those folks together is where where the partnership can play a role. So making sure that we're having the programs and the skills that people need to get upskilled and to get certified for the jobs that the businesses are saying that they're starved for right now. Because talent is really you've got two different things going from a talent perspective. You have the immediate, call it triage, the jobs you have open now, and it's going to be the jobs that you need 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And we can't do that without the colleges and universities.
Yeah, and we're going to move into economic development in a second, and I think there's a segue there. I think there's some connection between, we're going to talk hopefully a little bit about what we're doing to recruit businesses. Like you said, if an Amazon looks at our region and says, well, they're 25th out of 28, and maybe they don't want to move here, and things that we might be doing in that regard. But it seems to me like there's a correlation between that and developing our talent and recruiting people to actually come here and bring that talent to the Tampa Bay region, as opposed to getting an education here, but then taking that talent somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. And like I said, the partnerships work should be complementary to what the EDCs are doing, which, that's what our economic development organizations do, is they help recruit the businesses to come here. We want to have the data and the research and advocacy that help support us be the most attractive region that we can be, which to me, if we're going to be attractive, is really a three-legged stool between, transportation, education, workforce, and last but not least is housing affordability, right? So those are the components that we need. So we need to be advocating for those components to help us be our best, to make it an easier job for our EDOs to attract and maintain businesses in our communities.
Yeah, and how do you think currently we do compare to some of these other regions? I mean, you mentioned the regional report and the 19 other markets that we're compared to. How do we rank as far as economic development in that category?
So I think we're definitely getting better. The biggest thing with us is we're so fragmented. We don't have a single regional economic development arm here in Tampa Bay. So, leads, for example, come into Enterprise, Florida, and then they go out to the various EDOs. We're getting better. We're, I would say, about middle of the pack of that 19, but we want to be in the top half of that. And that's what all this data, all the work that we're doing, all the different things that we're suggesting as it relates to talent and pipeline management, is to help us get into that top half and not teeter into the bottom half.
Right. Okay. Let's move on to, I know that the partnership has a project called Project Opioid, and that's obviously a big issue around the country, around the world right now. And can you tell us a little bit more about that initiative and what you guys are doing with that?
Yeah, sure. So Project Opioid, we got a grant from Florida Blue about a year or so ago to help take a look at the opioid crisis and the impact on the Tampa Bay region. So we did that research and saw, the effect that it's having. Unfortunately, the numbers are not going in the right direction. They've gotten exponentially worse with the COVID during the COVID crisis. So that is now going to be spun off into its own not-for-profit. It's called Tampa Bay Lives, and they will work on, helping with the referrals to get folks into treatment, both outpatient and inpatient, as they need it. They will also help with, getting them resources to get the help. But what we did from the partnership is did the research to show the impact in our community and what that means from, rehabilitation, what it meant from opioid deaths. And then from that, it will spin off into its own not-for-profit, which is Tampa Bay Lives.
Gotcha. And will Tampa Bay Lives, will you guys stay involved in that initiative?
We will be involved in the sense that we will probably have the Council of Governors investor that champion that project will sit on the board of Tampa Bay Lives. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. We did have a question from one of the attendees, and so I like I said at the beginning, I'd prefer to ask these questions than the ones that we have, sort of on the page. We may have answered this. In addition to the partnership's research role, what do you think of the partnership's role in convening different governmental entities to work for our region? So I think we talked a little bit about that. But
no, I think we should have a big role in this. And that's why I've been spending my time meeting with the local governmental officials. I have heard from Mayor Jane Casser of Tampa that the mayor of Tampa, St. Pete, and Clearwater, that they get together and have, a meeting once a quarter just to talk about what's going on in our region. I think that, the partnership can help us at least, if we're talking to all of the different local officials, if they're not talking to each other, letting them know what we're hearing and what they're working on and how their priorities are similar and where they're not as aligned. I think this is one of our biggest challenges here in our region relative to other communities just in Florida, is that sometimes we get so focused on fighting with each other that we're missing the bigger picture of, hey, we're all on Team Tampa Bay, especially if we're working on something that we're trying to get done in Tallahassee. We need to be Team Tampa Bay and not Team Tampa, Team St. Pete, or Team Clearwater, or Team Manatee, if that makes sense. Because we got to fight, Miami-Dade. We want to go fight Orlando, if you will. And so I think the partnership has a significant role in having those relationships with the government officials so we can be a convener on behalf of the region.
Well, and speaking of not fighting or being united and not fighting amongst ourselves, here comes another one of those loaded questions: is the future of the Rays? And so, obviously that's sort of up in the air. We've all heard different things. At least I don't know, unless someone has the more information than what's out there, sort of the inside track. We're all sort of scratching our heads and wondering what's going to happen. And so I guess my question for the partnership, for you and the partnership, is what role, if any, do you guys see playing in that decision and what happens to the future of the Rays?
As it relates to the future of the Rays, from the partnership's perspective, we want to see the Rays stay in the Tampa Bay region. The Rays being here is an positive economic engine for our region. The Rays, we want to see baseball stay here. I don't know about you guys, but I don't want to live in a community that loses professional sports, right? I don't want to see what that looks like. I can't imagine the negative economic impact, say, Baltimore had when the Colts left, and it took them 25 years to get the Ravens back. I don't think any of us want to see that. In terms of the partnership, that's our position, is we want to see the Rays stay here. We think that any and all options to keep the Rays in the Tampa Bay area should be explored.
Great. And whether that's St. Pete or Tampa, I guess remains to be seen.
Right. We don't want them to become the Nashville Rays or the Raleigh Rays. We want them to stay here in Tampa Bay.
Right. Okay. And then one thing that I think we're all probably interested in, we've talked a lot about what you guys are doing and what you have done. I'd like to shift gears a little bit and look to the future and see, what you see the partnership doing, either short term, midterm, long term. I sort of divided it up: short term 1 to 3 years, midterm 3 to 7, and long term after 7. It could be, that the timing is a little bit different. But what do you see the partnership doing in the future?
I think immediately is helping us as a region with our communication. We're going to be at our best when we are getting and we're talking amongst the entire 8 counties, right? So I think that is a significant role that the partnership can play, is making sure that not only are we talking to everybody, but people who need to be speaking to each other are in fact doing that, and that we're not operating in silos. I would say that's a 1 to 3 year short-term goal for us. In terms of projects, we talked a little bit about Brightline. I see transportation as being a short, medium, and long-term play. Transportation options and transportation issues are not solved in 1 year increments. I mean, if you talk to folks about this West Shore interchange that we're all excited about, and mind you, we're excited that the funding has been approved, like nothing has actually physically happened. And we've been working on that for years, right? So it'll be several more years before it's done. So anything you're talking about transportation, just check that in every single category.
Right.
Because it's like, you're not going to come up with a transportation option that gets, fixed in 60 days. I think talent management, and pipeline management for our region, that's definitely a short and a long-term goal. As I say, that's what are the workers that we have today and getting them upskilled. And then that's K through 12 and what that looks like, so that that's the kids that are in college now, so that we maintain the talent and that they're graduating with the skills that we have. So if I look back and you're asking me, like, well, what do I have a crystal ball and what would I like to see? I'd like to see, like, people getting ready to go somewhere to an event and everybody's not picking their keys up in 5 years to go do it, right? That there's some options for them to get on, and it's options for them to not only do it within their county, but that connects our county. So whether, like I said, that's ferries or buses or rail, all of that, I think that will be success for us from a transportation standpoint.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I mean, transportation is one of those, you're right. I think, is never going to go away. I mean, at least, like I said, growing up in the DC area, it was a constant battle. You seem to, and it seems like that's what we're dealing with in Tampa as well. Just when you start to make some improvements and you get to a point where things are a little bit better, you have more people and you have more demand. And now you've got to move on to the next plan. And so it's constantly evolving. It's constantly something that the region has to deal with. And you're right. It just doesn't, you don't solve any shortcomings certainly overnight. And I don't think you resolve the issue. Just never goes away, right? It's just constantly evolving.
Right. And I think the collaboration works best when everybody's not worried about who gets credit for the win. So, there's always a couple of imaginary lines that we have that get in our way sometimes. For us, it's the bridge and, political term limits. These are things that should not, this should not get in the way of us getting the work done that we need to get done for our community.
Right. Okay. My last question is basically, if you could pick one issue that's the nearest and dearest to your heart, most important to you, that you would focus on or try to improve in the Tampa Bay region, what would it be, and how would you seek to address that?
I think we spent a lot of our time this afternoon talking about it, and that's the transportation piece, right? I would love to see, like I said, this is 5-7 years from now, folks should be able to get on a commuter ferry, to get to and from work. I'd like to see buses that did not take 60 minutes for people to have to be able to get to work. I'd like to see rail that connects within our light rail, like within the cities limits, not just city, and also rail that connects us that way. And then selfishly, I'd love to see rail where we never had to drive to Orlando again, ever. But we could all just go from like Orlando to Tampa, from the airport to the airport, that type of thing. So, yeah.
Yeah, I would like to see rail or some sort of public transportation that gets us to the beaches.
Mm-hmm.
Because anyone who's sat on the road to Clearwater Beach or down to St. Pete on a Saturday afternoon, probably has felt my pain.
And there's a reason why once Brightline comes over here that we can't take that and connect Tampa to St. Pete, and then ultimately take that rail and connect it out to the beaches, both in St. Pete and in Clearwater, right? So you got to start building the track so that you have things to pick up on and connect to.
Right. We do have one other question from our attendees. Johns Hopkins has already invested in our local community through the Johns Hopkins Children's Hospital. Do you see them expanding their involvement with our community in the future?
I sure hope so. I think their expansion is a good indicator that they're committed and invested in our community. And I hope that is just a nod to them doing future expansion here and future involvement for us here in the Tampa Bay area.
Excellent. We've got another question. What do you think is the significance of Kathy Wood moving ARK to St. Pete? We hear people call our region as a second Wall Street now. Do you agree?
I think Kathy Wood and Art coming to here from New York is huge for our community. I think it shows that the Tampa Bay is an innovative hub, and that if you're in that space, that we're a place for you to be, and an alternative to New York or an alternative to Silicon Valley. It is a huge win for our community. I think it says to other entrepreneurs and other folks in the innovation space that you can thrive here, that this is a good fit for you. So I think it could be a springboard for innovation and technology companies coming to our community. I think it's huge.
Excellent. Okay. Well, we're a little bit. Oh, I'm sorry. I saw the questions. I thought maybe we had a new question. We don't. We're a little bit ahead of schedule. But Bemetra, really on behalf of the firm and everybody on the webinar, would like to thank you for taking the time to come and talk to us today. I think it's been very informative. I've certainly learned a lot more about the partnership and what you guys do and what you're planning on doing. And personally, I think it's exciting. I think, we've got obviously we've got some shortcomings. We've got some other things that are doing really well. But it seems like everything is trending in the right direction. And we're I'm very excited to see, some of these short-term and mid-term things that we just talked about and where we are in 3 to 7 years.
Well, I would say this. Thank you so much for having me. I'm only 2 months into the job, so I'm still learning a lot, and would love to be able to come back, once I've been able to get my arms around a few more things and share with you guys again sometime.
Absolutely. Well, we'll have to try to set that up to, after you've had a little bit of time to get your arms around everything and get some things accomplished. We'll have you back and see where we're at. With that, I want to thank everybody and everybody for attending. And let you know to keep your eyes peeled for our next community and development series forum, which will probably be in the first quarter of the upcoming year. And I hope and wish everybody a happy holiday and a happy new year. And we'll talk soon.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Bemetra.